Yes, I already know the question that you're asking. Tim, should I get Wyrmspan over Wingspan? My answer to that today is a resounding yes. But there are 5 things that I think you should know before making that purchase. And on top of that, they're both great games. Okay, don't get me wrong. Wyrmspan is a great game. Wingspan is a great game. They are both fantastic engine builders. I don't think you can go wrong with either choice, but I think you should definitely consider these 5 points. As always, this is not a sponsored review, but I was sent this copy of Wyrmspan. So let's give you a 1-minute quick lightning fast recap. In Wyrmspan, you're building a sanctuary for dragons, and on your turn, you can excavate. Now that lets you put a cave card into one of your 3 rows of caves, and it's gonna cost you 1 coin. Now, the more caves that you build, then the more eggs that it'll cost. So your first action is to excavate, is to basically put a cave on your player board. Now, what do you do with that cave? Well, the only way for you to bring dragons onto your board is to entice. You pay for the resource on the dragon's top left corner, and then you play it onto a cave where it can live, because on the left side of the dragon card, it'll show you 3 tabs, and it highlights which row that the dragon can stay in. The third action is to explore. Now, this is where you take your adventure through the cave, and you also get to visit dragons along the way, and you can gain a lot of resources and benefits as you make your way further throughout the cave. And those are your 3 actions. You pay a coin to put a cave onto your board, and then with that cave, you can bring a dragon onto your board depending on A, whether or not you have the resources, and B, whether or not it can live in that specific cave. And the last one is to take your adventure throughout all the caves. Your turn is over once you run out of coins. So coins in this game, it's like a currency, but also the number of actions that you can take too. And then once both players pass, then the round's over. And any dragons that have an end of round scoring condition, that's gonna activate here. Then to start the next round, you're gonna get 6 coins plus an egg. You're gonna score points for whoever meets this specific condition. And then lastly, you refresh the dragon cards and the cave cards. Now, after 4 rounds, the Dracologist with the most points from eggs on dragon cards, the dragon cards themselves, resources on dragon cards, some endgame scoring from Dragon Guild points that I'll talk about in a second, and overall the round scoring too. All that factors into the endgame points. So very, very similar to Wingspan in that sense. Now, let's talk about 5 points that I mentioned earlier. So point number 1, I love the Dragon Guild that's involved with this game. It's really, really cool. I feel like there are a good amount of games that have kind of like this sideboard. It's almost like a mini game. And the Dragon Guild is that too. But it's so tightly involved with the main game that it doesn't feel like a chore. It actually feels like a side quest that helps you along with your main quest, as games like this should feel like. The reason why the Dragon Guild is so involved is because every time you see this symbol, that means you get to move along the Dragon Guild. So then your shield marker will move along this circle, and then you'll get resources and cave cards and dragons as you go. And as you pass the halfway point on either the bottom or the top, then you get to place one of your markers onto the guild. The reason why I like the Dragon Guild so much is because it gives you a sense of direction. Like for instance, the Rainforest Guild. This one's all about generating resources, but then you have the Plains Guild, which is all about laying eggs. So I love that it gives you a sense of direction, and it doesn't dictate your gameplay, but it kind of guides you on how you should play this game this round. And that's what makes every gameplay fresh. Versus in Wingspan, you're only paying attention to the board in front of you. Not necessarily a bad thing, but there's no guidance, there's no direction, and the only type of direction that you get is pretty much like the hand of cards that you start off with. So not necessarily a bad thing, but I do like how there's this fresh take of it, and the guild cards can change with every single game too. So I love how this is implemented into Wyrmspan. Point number 2, I love the payoff in Wyrmspan because the more cave cards that you get, the more dragon cards you get to put out, the more adventures you get to go on. I love how the payoff here is really satisfying because it constantly scales up. Like the trend in Wyrmspan just scales up. But then in Wingspan, it's kind of like you start off going up, you build off your engine, right? But then there's this plateau, and then it goes down because then you lose actions as the game progresses. And for me, it's not as fun versus in Wyrmspan, where it feels like the work that you put into your engine, because it's really hard to start off your engine in the beginning. You feel so broke. You're like, oh God, I have nothing to play with. I have no resources. But then as time goes on and you keep playing, then your engine gets really, really satisfying and you end on a high. And for me, that's really fun versus losing the amount of actions that you can take in Wingspan. That's why coins here, yes, it is a currency, but the more coins that you get, then the more actions that you get to take too. And I think that's the big win for Wyrmspan. Number 3, I want to piggyback off the last point a little bit. So in Wingspan, I love how by the end, you feel so OP. So you get 3 resources, you get to draw a bunch of cards. The only thing is you don't get to enjoy that engine for so long because your actions are like cut in half by that end. So you get to have a very strong engine, you just don't get to enjoy it for as often as you would like to. Versus in Wyrmspan, yes, it is constantly trending upwards, but then as you get to that point too, it is more costly because then you got to pay a coin and then a coin and an egg and then a coin and 2 eggs. So the cost isn't anything too detrimental. You just have to balance out how often you get to explore, and you're capped at 3, right? You only get to explore 3 times in 1 round. So in that sense, that's why I'm kind of neutral about both points. Like I see the ups and downs for Wyrmspan, I see the ups and downs for Wingspan. So if you like that burst mechanic, then Wingspan is definitely more your game. But if you like the constantly trending up, yet it will get limited, and for good reason too, right? You don't want to have some crazy overpowered engine without any kind of limit to it. Then Wyrmspan will definitely be more of your jam. Now, 2 more points. Number 4, I feel like this is the reason why Wingspan doesn't hit my table as often. So I played Wingspan a ton of times over the years. It's actually one of the first games I covered on my channel when I went out to like a dock and like flew a drone to make cinematic videos at the time. But then this game kind of collected dust because last year Wingspan didn't hit my table at all for an entire year. And I think the main reason for that is because I'm not the biggest fan of randomized resources. So here in Wingspan, you roll dice and then you get to pick off these resources for one of your actions, right? And I know that you get to convert your resources if you want to. You can convert any 2 resources for 1, but it is kind of costly and it does play a huge factor in what you can play. So the dice are fun. I love the dice tower, but randomized resources, not my most favorite thing. And I think the reason why it doesn't hit my table as often versus in Wyrmspan, you have so much more control over the resources that you're getting, because like if you're looking for a dragon that needs gold, or if you're looking for a dragon that needs milk, then you can play dragons that will generate those resources, and then they're going to constantly generate the resources that you want. So I like having more control. It makes the game more fun. Like oftentimes in Wingspan, you'll just take resources just for the heck of it. Like, oh, I need some wheat for my next bird that I just drew, but there's only mouse and fish here. So I'll get a fish for now because there's another bird coming up that needs fish, you know? And that action isn't bad, but it's not as satisfying, it's not as rewarding as you driving up the engine that you want to, and that's the resource that you get to generate for the control that you get. Number 5, last point. I'm gonna take this divider out because we're bringing the games together now. Number 5, I'm gonna end with the most basic and superficial point here, but it's something that factors into whether or not I wanna play a game or not, okay? That last point is theme. Look, I love birds, don't get me wrong. I love birds, I love animals, but when you introduce dragons, like that is more up of something that I enjoy a lot more. Like when I'm playing board games, I like to imagine fantasy world. Like fantasy is my favorite theme. I just find dragons more interesting, but I still really love what Wingspan laid out as its foundation, right? And again, I'm only comparing the base game of Wingspan to the base game for now of Wyrmspan. So we're not including the Oceania and the other expansions for Wingspan when I'm talking about this entire video. But for the bird cards, it's really cool how each one has like a unique fact. And I love all the things that Wingspan set out to do and what it has done and what it has accomplished. But at the end of the day, if I want to play with dragons, I love that you're building a sanctuary for dragons and that you're adventuring and you're visiting each dragon one by one and you're laying dragon eggs. So let's go ahead and rapid fire some questions that I know are going to be asked when comparing these 2 games. If you already have Wingspan, should you get Wyrmspan? If you love this game, I think so. I think it adds a lot of brand new things that you're going to enjoy. It's going to make the gameplay of Wingspan feel very different. And of course, if you love dragons, that's a hands down, yes, get this game. But if you are kind of indifferent about Wingspan, if you don't really like the whole engine building aspect to it, then I don't think Wyrmspan is going to offer anything drastically too new for you. I feel like only if you already like Wingspan, then yes, you will definitely like Wyrmspan too. But if you don't like Wingspan, I would probably avoid this because there are a lot of similar mechanics to that. If you have neither and you just want to start without like having to get invested into the expansions like Oceania and everything, then I would probably go with Wyrmspan. So with that said, I would give Wyrmspan overall a 4 out of 5, solid game. I know that this is going to climb up my list as time goes on. I highly recommend you at the very least check out Wyrmspan, see what it offers, and see if it's a good fit for you. I hope you all enjoyed today's review and found it helpful as always. If you made it here to the very end, go ahead and comment gold for my favorite resource in Wyrmspan. They need little gold bars in this game, but wolf fact. I'll see you next one.